Operation Cobra, July 1944, Normandy, France. After 6 weeks of grinding combat in the Norman hedgerows, American forces launched a massive breakout operation, preceded by the heaviest aerial bombardment in support of ground troops ever attempted. Over 2,400 Allied aircraft dropped thousands of tons of bombs on a narrow front, creating a hole in German defenses that American armor poured through, transforming the stalemate in Normandy into a war of movement that would lead to the liberation of France.
Welcome back, everyone. Today, I want to tell you about the operation that broke the stalemate in Normandy and set the stage for the liberation of France. An operation that began with one of the most massive aerial bombardments of the war, survived a tragic friendly fire incident, and ended with American tanks racing across France faster than anyone thought possible. This is the story of Operation Cobra, launched on July 25, 1944. To understand Operation Cobra, you need to understand the situation in Normandy in late July 1944. The Allies had landed on D-Day, June 6th, and established their beachheads. Everyone back home thought the war would be over quickly now. The newsreels showed our boys storming the beaches and liberating French villages. Victory seemed just around the corner. But the reality in Normandy was very different. After the initial landings, the Allied advance had stalled. For 6 weeks, American forces had been fighting through the bocage, the Norman hedgerow country, and it was a nightmare. The bocage wasn't like anything American soldiers had trained for. These weren't just hedges like you'd see in someone's backyard. These were ancient earthen walls, 4 or 5 feet high, covered with thick bushes and trees, with roots going deep into the ground. And they were everywhere. Every field, every farm, every road was bordered by these hedgerows. The Germans used them brilliantly. They'd set up machine guns behind hedgerows with perfect fields of fire across the open fields. When American soldiers tried to advance, they'd get cut down. When American tanks tried to push through the hedgerows, they'd get stuck or expose their thin belly armor and get hit by German anti-tank weapons. Progress was measured in hundreds of yards per day, sometimes less. Casualties were enormous. Entire battalions were chewed up, taking a single field or village. The 90th Infantry Division, for example, suffered such heavy losses that it had to be pulled out of the line and reorganized. Private First Class Harold Baumgarten from New York, who'd survived Omaha Beach on D-Day, later said, "I thought Omaha Beach was the worst, but the hedgerows were worse in their own way. On the beach, it was intense but quick. In the bocage, it went on day after day. Every field was a battle. Every hedgerow hid Germans. We'd fight all day to take one field. Then the next morning, we'd do it all over again." By late July, the American forces under General Omar Bradley had been fighting in the bocage for 6 weeks. They'd advanced maybe 30 miles from the beaches. 30 miles in 6 weeks, at a cost of thousands of casualties. The British and Canadians on the eastern side of the beachhead were similarly stuck, fighting for the city of Caen.
Something had to change. The Allies couldn't spend months grinding through the hedgerows. They needed a breakthrough, a way to break out of the bocage and into the open country beyond, where American mobility and firepower could be decisive. General Bradley came up with Operation Cobra. The plan was bold. Instead of attacking along a wide front, they'd concentrate overwhelming force on a narrow sector, just 5 miles wide. First, they'd pulverize the German defenses with the heaviest aerial bombardment ever used in support of ground troops. Then, while the Germans were still stunned, American infantry would punch through. And once a hole was opened, American armor, tanks and tank destroyers, would pour through and race deep into the German rear, not stopping to fight for every field, but bypassing resistance and driving hard for the interior of France. It was a gamble. If it worked, it could break the stalemate and turn the campaign into a war of movement. If it failed, it would be another costly attack that gained little ground. The target area was south of the town of Saint-Lô, which American forces had just captured after brutal fighting. The German defenses there were formidable. Experienced troops, dug-in positions, minefields, and all those hedgerows. But Bradley believed that massive aerial bombardment could crack those defenses wide open. The bombardment was scheduled for July 24th. Over 2,400 Allied aircraft would participate: heavy bombers, medium bombers, fighter bombers. They dropped thousands of tons of bombs on a rectangular area about 5 miles wide and 1 mile deep, right where the German front lines were. But there was a problem. The bombing had to be precise. The German lines were close to American positions, in some places just a few hundred yards apart. If the bombs fell short, they'd hit American troops. Bradley specified that the bombers must approach parallel to the front lines, flying east to west to minimize the risk of short bombing. On July 24th, the operation began. But weather over the target area was poor. Clouds, limited visibility, some bomber formations attacked, others turned back. And tragically, some bombs fell short, landing on American positions. The 30th Infantry Division took casualties from friendly fire. About 25 American soldiers were killed, over 130 wounded. Bradley was furious. He'd specified the approach direction to prevent exactly this kind of accident. He demanded to know why the bombers hadn't followed the plan. It turned out the Air Force had decided to approach perpendicular to the front lines, north to south, because it was more efficient for the bomber formations. Nobody had told Bradley about this change.
The operation was postponed. The bombers would try again the next day, July 25th. Bradley made it clear: no more changes to the plan. The approach must be parallel to the front lines. On the morning of July 25th, the sky over Normandy filled with aircraft. First came fighter bombers, P-47 Thunderbolts and AP-38 Lightnings, swooping low to hit specific targets. Then came medium bombers, B-26 Marauders and A-20 Havocs, flying at medium altitude. And finally came the heavies, B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, flying high, their bomb bays full. The American soldiers on the front lines had been pulled back a safe distance. They sat in their foxholes and watched the show. Wave after wave of bombers, the sky darkened by aircraft, the sound deafening. Sergeant Curtis Coolin from New York described it: "We'd never seen anything like it. Hundreds of planes, maybe thousands. The bombing went on for over an hour. The ground shook like an earthquake. Smoke and dust rose up so thick you couldn't see the target area. We thought nothing could survive that." But then, disaster struck again. Despite the precautions, despite the specified approach routes, some bombs again fell short. This time, the casualties were worse. Over 100 American soldiers were killed, nearly 500 wounded. Among the dead was Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American officer killed in Europe during the war. He'd been visiting the front to observe the attack and was killed by bombs from his own Air Force. The tragedy cast a shadow over the operation. Men were angry, demoralized. They'd been hit by their own bombers 2 days in a row. But there was no time to dwell on it. The attack had to continue. The bombers had done their job. The German defenses were devastated. Now it was up to the ground forces to exploit the breakthrough. The infantry went forward. The 9th Infantry Division, the 4th Infantry Division, the 30th Infantry Division, despite having just been hit by friendly fire, all attacked south into the bombed area. What they found was chaos. The landscape was unrecognizable, cratered, torn up, hedgerows obliterated. German positions were destroyed. Survivors were dazed, unable to fight effectively. But the Germans weren't finished. They'd been hurt badly, but they were still there. As American infantry pushed into the bombed zone, they encountered resistance.
German soldiers who'd survived the bombing fought back. It was confused, chaotic combat in a landscape transformed by explosives. The first day's advance was slower than hoped. A few miles, not the rapid breakthrough Bradley wanted. Some officers worried the operation was failing, that it would turn into another grinding battle like the previous 6 weeks.
But Bradley kept pushing. On July 26th, he committed his armored divisions, the 2nd Armored Division and the 3rd Armored Division. These were the spearheads, the units that would turn the breakthrough into a breakout. Their orders were clear: don't stop to fight, bypass resistance, drive deep, move fast. And that's exactly what they did. American tanks began pouring through the gap in the German lines. Instead of stopping to clear every pocket of resistance, they bypassed them, leaving infantry to mop up later. They drove south, then turned west, racing across the French countryside. The Germans tried to contain the breakthrough. They rushed reinforcements to the area, tried to establish new defensive lines. But they couldn't keep up. American armor was moving too fast, hitting them from unexpected directions, disrupting their communications and supply lines. Staff Sergeant Curtis Cullen, the same sergeant who'd watched the bombing, came up with an innovation that helped enormously. He designed a device made from German beach obstacles that could be welded to the front of a Sherman tank. These Cullen hedgerow cutters, or rhino tanks, could smash through hedgerows instead of climbing over them. Suddenly, the bocage wasn't such an obstacle anymore. Cullen's invention was quickly copied and spread throughout the American armored forces. By July 28th, American forces had advanced over 10 miles, more than they'd gained in the previous 6 weeks. The breakthrough was real. The German front was collapsing, and American commanders sensed opportunity. General George Patton's Third Army became operational on August 1st. Patton, the aggressive, flamboyant commander who'd been in disgrace after slapping soldiers in Sicily, was back in action. His army included some of the most mobile divisions in the American forces, and he had one order: exploit the breakthrough, move fast, go deep. Patton's tanks raced west into Brittany, then turned east toward the heart of France. They moved so fast that German forces couldn't react. In 1 week, Patton's Third Army advanced over 200 miles. Towns and cities that the Germans had occupied for 4 years were liberated in hours. The breakthrough had become a breakout, and the breakout was becoming a pursuit. The German army in Normandy was in danger of being completely destroyed. Hitler, against the advice of his generals, ordered a counterattack at Mortain to cut off the American advance. It was a desperate gamble, throwing the last German reserves into an attack that had little chance of success.
The American 30th Infantry Division, the same division that had been hit by friendly fire during the Cobra bombardment, bore the brunt of the German counterattack at Mortain. For several days they held against repeated German attacks, including assaults by heavy Tiger tanks. They held because they had to. If the Germans broke through, they could cut off Patton's advancing forces. The battle at Mortain was intense, but the Americans held. And while the Germans were throwing their reserves into that failed counterattack, American and British forces were closing a trap around them. The Falaise Pocket, as it came to be called, threatened to surround and destroy the entire German 7th Army. Thousands of German soldiers were killed or captured in the Falaise Pocket. The German army in Normandy was shattered. The survivors retreated in disorder toward the German border. The Battle of Normandy was over. The Allies had won. Operation Cobra had achieved everything Bradley hoped for and more. It broke the stalemate in Normandy. It destroyed German defensive capabilities in France. It opened a way for the rapid liberation of France. By the end of August, Paris was liberated. By September, Allied forces were at the German border. But the victory came at a cost. The friendly fire incidents during the initial bombardment killed over 100 American soldiers and wounded nearly 500 more. These weren't combat casualties. These were men killed by their own side. The tragedy haunted the survivors and raised serious questions about the coordination between air and ground forces. The 30th Infantry Division, which suffered casualties from friendly fire on July 24th and 25th, then held at Mortain against the German counterattack, became known as Roosevelt's SS, a nickname given by German soldiers who were impressed by their fighting ability. They'd proven themselves in the worst possible circumstances. For the individual American soldier, Operation Cobra meant different things. For the infantrymen who'd been fighting in the bocage for 6 weeks, it meant finally breaking out of that nightmare landscape. For the tankers racing across France, it meant the kind of mobile warfare they'd trained for. For everyone, it meant hope. Hope that the war might actually end soon, that they might get home.
Private First Class Raymond Ganter from Illinois wrote in his diary, "After 2 months of hell in the hedgerows, fighting for every field, watching friends die for a few yards of ground, we're finally moving. The tanks are racing ahead. We're liberating towns every day. French people are cheering us, throwing flowers. It feels like we're winning. For the first time since D-Day, it feels like we're really winning." The French civilians certainly felt liberated. After 4 years of German occupation, American tanks rolling through their towns meant freedom. The scenes of liberation were joyous. People in the streets, celebrations, tears of happiness. American soldiers were treated as heroes, given wine and food, kissed by grateful French citizens. But not everything was celebration. The fighting continued. German rearguards fought stubborn delaying actions. Some French towns were damaged or destroyed in the fighting. And as American forces advanced, they began to discover the reality of what German occupation had meant. Stories of resistance fighters executed, civilians punished, the casual brutality of occupation. Operation Cobra also revealed the growing superiority of Allied forces in 1944. The massive aerial bombardment that opened the operation showed Allied air superiority. The Germans couldn't have launched such an operation because they didn't control the skies. The rapid advance showed the effectiveness of American armor and the skill of American commanders in mobile warfare. The logistics that kept those advancing forces supplied showed the industrial might backing the Allied armies. The Germans, by contrast, were stretched thin, short of fuel, and unable to replace losses. They still fought well. German soldiers remained formidable opponents even in defeat, but they couldn't match the resources the Allies could bring to bear. General Omar Bradley, who planned Operation Cobra, later wrote, "Operation Cobra was the turning point of the campaign in Northwest Europe. It broke the German defenses in Normandy and opened the way for our advance across France. Yes, we suffered from friendly fire, and that was tragic, but the operation achieved its objective. We broke out, and once we broke out, we never stopped until we reached Germany." Eisenhower agreed. He later said that Operation Cobra was one of the key operations of the entire war in Europe. It transformed the situation from stalemate to breakthrough, from grinding attritional warfare to rapid mobile operations. It made everything that followed possible.
Today, if you visit Normandy, you can still see evidence of Operation Cobra.
The area south of St. Lo, where the bombardment took place, bears scars to this day. Unusually lumpy ground where bomb craters were filled in, trees that grow in unnatural patterns because the original landscape was so disturbed. There are memorials to the soldiers who fought there, both American and German. The tragedy of the friendly fire casualties is remembered too. There's a memorial to General McNair at the location where he was killed. It serves as a reminder that in war, tragedy can come from unexpected directions, and that even in victory, there are always costs. Operation Cobra. The breakout from Normandy. The beginning of the end for German forces in France. A testament to American military capability and the courage of the soldiers who made it happen. Thank you for listening, and never forget what those soldiers accomplished in those critical days of late July and early August 1944, when the stalemate in Normandy was shattered and the road to victory opened wide.
Operation Cobra changed the course of the war, but at a terrible cost. In just a few days, over 4,000 American soldiers were killed or wounded, and more than 30,000 Germans were taken prisoner or lost forever in the chaos. The fields of Normandy, once green and full of life, were turned into vast cemeteries of twisted steel and broken dreams. Every burned-out tank, every crater, every white cross in the soil became a silent witness to the price of freedom. War may bring victory, but it always leaves behind empty homes, shattered hearts, and ghosts that never stop walking the land. Those who start wars, they never pay that price. It's always the young, the brave, the ordinary, who bleed for the ambitions of the powerful. And somewhere, even now, the wind over Normandy still carries their names, whispered by the dead, remembered by the living.